everyone, thanks for joining us today. In this video, we're talking about how a worship leader can communicate well with an audio engineer or a sound person, whatever your terminology is. And I'm here with Rigel Crow. He's been one of our sound engineers for probably 8 years at Kingsland, and we have really enjoyed all that he has brought to the table. Rigel, tell us a little bit about your beginnings with sound and audio, where that all started, how long you've been doing it, and if you've had any training.
So there's kind of two schools of thought, right? There's the guys who went to school to do this, and then there's the guys who were the School of Hard Knocks. And so that's me. So I started off in the School of Hard Knocks. My first position out of Bible college, I ran a coffee shop. It was a nonprofit coffee shop, and nobody was drinking coffee. So we had to figure out how to get people in. So we started doing live music. Various bands and worship acts would come through. But I started off on one little mixer with one channel, one auxiliary, and then I kind of grew from there. So and I just fell in love with doing audio, and that's how I started. And it's been a fun ride. It's been an adventure, and I love it.
So how long have you been doing this?
So about 19 years, since 2001 is when I very first started. So
okay, and no formal training, just the School of Hard Knocks.
Yep, School of Hard Knocks and the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, amen. So no matter what your background is, you can achieve a really high level. And I tell you, this guy right here, one of the best I've ever worked with. Not only is he great at the mix in the room, but he is incredible with the relationship that he has with those who are on the platform, which we're going to talk about in a minute, is so crucial to really having a good partnership and environment in the worship experience. So relationships are important. You want to develop a good relationship, not only in the band setting, but also outside. Like Rigel and I are friends. We connect with each other on the phone, see how each other's family's doing. And there's something about that personal connection that helps us in all environments that we find ourselves partnered in. So one great place to begin after you develop a relationship is to set expectations. And when you have what you are looking for as a worship leader that you can clearly explain to the audio engineer, it makes a world of difference. One of the things I did when I first came was to figure out what my preferences were inside of a mix, what I wanted to hear. And so I would communicate that to Rigel. He knows I want a really strong lead vocal. And then right below that, just below that, I want all the other harmony singers. I want them to be buried. Some people bury them into the mix, but I want them to be up a little higher. And then we set the layers of the band, and I really trust him more for that. But important things to talk about in that, we'll cover that later. But setting expectations, one of the things you can do is get a recording. If there's a track that you've heard that you're like, man, this is what I want our band to sound like. Give that to your audio engineer. Let him listen to it. He'll start to learn you and learn what you desire in that moment. Rigel, do you have any feedback on preferences? Like maybe what would you communicate to a worship leader about things that would help you learn them?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you do send them a song, make sure they actually listen to it. And then kind of give them little cues on what you liked and what you didn't like inside of that song, inside that mix. Because with Josh, one of the things he forgot to say is he does like choir a little bit above the harmonies. And so just to explain that preference and the engineer to understand how that mix is layered. Because, most engineers are going to do your kick and your snare as a foundation. But then when vocals come in, it is a little bit preferential. And so just getting to know your preference is super, super important. So that way the audio engineer has a definition of success that they can go back to. So that way if there's a missed expectations, he can say, well, hold on, I thought I was here. And you're like, well, you weren't quite there, So that way everyone's aligned. So that way your mix comes out sparkling every single time and everybody's happy.
So communication is key when you are trying to say what you need to say to your sound engineer, and really not just what you say, but how you say it. I know for us, our soundboard is in the balcony, and the platform, there's a pretty good distance between, and so there's a number of ways I could get Rigel's attention. I could speak into the microphone. I could just yell out, hey, Rigel, we need this. But you want to talk in advance how you want to be approached. Like Rigel, he can pretty much take a lot of different styles of approach when it comes to being communicated to, and because everybody's different, but some guys would rather you do it more privately and not quite in front of all the people. There's a little bit of sometimes embarrassment that can happen just because they're trying to do a great job and they want to be doing it well. But they don't want to be embarrassed. And I totally understand that.
Right.
But Rigel,
right.
what are some ways as far as communicating back and forth that work the best for you.
Yeah. So let me say this real quick. If this is the first time you ever worked with a guy or a gal or whoever's running sound for you, just ask them, like, hey, what's the best way for me to communicate my needs to you? And they'll tell you, hey, I like to be communicated. There's maybe a talk back situation, and you have a comm in your ear that you can communicate through, or just shouting, just depending on the preference. So for me, I don't mind the shouting from the stage, as long as it's like not during the service. If we're in rehearsal, it's totally fine with me. But calling an audio engineer out during a production is like the number one no. Don't ever do that. They will hate you for the rest of the production. So because like Josh said, we don't like to be embarrassed. We want to do a good job, and most of the guys who are behind the audio board, they're the background players, and they don't want to be out in front. They just want to make sure everything is going well. So for me and Josh, we kind of, we've been working together so long, I can tell when he looks over at a certain point, something's going on over there. So I'll look over, oh yeah, that mic needs to be hotter, or he's not plugged in, or something's going on there. But yeah, just communicate to your audio engineer your preferences. And then as you get to begin to work with them, they'll begin to learn your style, and then they can anticipate what your needs. And most of the time, a good audio engineer will anticipate and just try to do everything they can to make the production a success.
You also want to communicate the details of the service. Now, everybody's different. I know not all worship people are quite massively into the details, but I know for my brain, I want to let him know who is leading which song. And there are certain songs that have multiple leaders. And so I'll literally type that out on a document and email it to him. Hey, this person on this part on the chorus, they're leading this. On the verse, this next person is leading this song. There's a duet here. But just really communicating those specific details in advance. Don't leave it up to the audio engineer to figure it out. Hopefully he has some musical background, but he can't read your brain. You need to allow him the opportunity to have success by communicating in advance. Maybe there's a lead guitar part that you want to be highlighted on a solo section or in the intro of a song or something like that, or a piano part that needs to be highlighted. All those things can be talked about in advance. It takes a lot more work, but it really makes a big impact. And then the last thing, communicating in the moment. Rajal mentioned this just a bit ago, but as the service has begun, the rehearsal communication is different, right? But when the service begins, you have to find ways. Sometimes there are signs and subtle ways that I'll get Rajal's attention by looking at him with my eyebrows up, or something, or like tapping a mic with my finger and just slowly pointing up very subtly off to the side. He knows, okay, that means his microphone up. Or if I make a motion like kick drum or something down, then he can make those adjustments without getting everybody's attention and distracting in the service. So finding what works for you is probably the best when it comes to communicating in those moments. But experiment with things. It's not always going to work, but that's okay. You find what does work for your team, and you can create a language. Another great way you can think about communicating together is walking the room. So as the worship band is playing, there are many times I see Rigel out walking the room, and we have the luxury of having an iPad that's connected to the soundboard so he can make adjustments while he's walking. Since the soundboard's in the balcony, it's a lot different experience up there than it is down on the floor. So Rigel will do that. And also I will at times be able to take a step out of the band. I have wireless guitar pack. At times I can walk out and sort of do the same thing while he's up at the soundboard. There's a lot of times we've caught eyes and I'm saying, hey, this a little bit more down, this one a little bit more up, or I don't hear this and I'd like to, or I'll even run up to the soundboard and just talk to him a little closer, because sometimes it's hard to shout over the band and what's going on in rehearsal. But I just think that's a great habit to get into. You need to know what it feels like and what the experience is like on the other side of the speakers, as much as you are understanding what it's like from where you are as a leadership role. And same, the audio engineer needs to know what it feels like for that congregation member sitting in that seat, or that student, wherever it is, wherever you're leading, so that he can make great adjustments, because every part of the room is different.
Yeah, absolutely. If your audio guy or your audio engineer is not walking the room consistently, that may be a training opportunity for you to kind of speak into them, to be like, hey guys, we need to make sure you're understanding every single part of the room. Like some parts are a little bass heavy, some parts are a little louder on the high end, and so depending on where they're sitting, That's a, younger audio engineer is not going to take those things into consideration. They're going to think, okay, if I'm behind soundboard, this is the best sounding location, and oftentimes it's not. And with the new digital boards, you grab an iPad and you can walk around and you can just dial in the mix better for your congregation. And being with the worship pastor is incredibly helpful too, because then it helps you understand what they're looking for inside of those moments. Better than listening to a song, right? Because you're in the moment, it's real time, and of course, it's always during rehearsal. Don't walk out in the middle of the worship set and do that, obviously. So that would be awkward.
So communication is important, but it's not just what you're communicating; it's how you're communicating. And the best way, in my opinion, is to meet your audio engineer with grace and kindness. And so, as Rigel and I talk back and forth with each other, I try to communicate every detail like he's my friend, like we're on the same team. In fact, you need to treat your audio engineer like he's part of the band. Now, that's really not always the easiest thing to do, and I've seen many, many times where there's a hostility, a line in the sand drawn between the media world and the worship music world, and you just can't have that. That just doesn't work well. Right. Rigel, what has been your experience with communication, like even when you were growing up?
Right. So when I first got into it, there was a lot. I saw a lot of grumpy audio guys, and I just decided I wasn't going to be one of those grumpy audio guys. A lot of them are real brash, and I don't. I just decided not to be like that. And so in the worship environment, if you're kind to your audio guy, he's going to be kind back to you, hopefully.
Yeah.
Because we want to be treated with respect, and we're here to make things successful. And so absolutely,
and I think also that starts with the worship leader. Mm-hmm. That's not on necessarily always the audio engineer, although I know this guy right here, Rigel, does an incredible job of setting that tone. So if you are an audio engineer watching this video, you have the opportunity to set that tone. But I think it's important for the worship leader to really set that tone, because the whole team on the platform will follow most of the time how the worship leader is responding to the audio engineer. Let's talk a little bit about effects. The sound engineers of today have so many effects and ways that they can manipulate the sound, just even in a board, because a lot of these boards we're using are digital and have a lot of capability. So Rigel, tell us a little bit about, in a worship setting, what kind of effects do you lean towards using?
Yeah, so I like a few different effects, and I like to blend them together. So when I say a few, I'm literally just two. In a worship environment, there's not a lot that you really need to enhance a vocal or to enhance another instrument. Mainly, I use a plate reverb for vocals, and I use it not where it's over, but it's just enough to help that vocal carry, especially in a big, strong worship moment when you've got a big vocal and they do a big note. It just helps it carry out and draw out a little bit. And then I'll layer in a little bit of effects, but a little bit of tap delay. And so that tap delay, make sure, for one, it's tapped into the click track with the band. Otherwise, it's going to be off tempo and really weird. And you don't want it overbearing. You just want to layer it in underneath. So it's just a little bit of a trail at the end of a vocal. So, and then you also want to I use another, just a hall verb. I'll put a little bit on the pianos and maybe a touch on the drums, but not too much to where it's really noticeable, but just enough to make it sound just a little bit bigger. Because if you use too much, it's distracting, and especially in a worship environment. Your goal as an audio engineer is not to be distracting. Your goal is to make sure that worship is engaging with the Lord and not engaging with the tech. So that's super important, that you're helping to communicate and helping people to draw closer to God, not go, why does that sound so weird?
Yeah, I've heard our guys say a lot of times, if you're not noticed, then you've done your job.
Exactly.
Which is a really incredible position to take, and I think serves the church and serves the moment really, really well. So one phrase you've probably heard as a worship leader at some point if you've led in a church is, it's too loud. But that can mean a lot of different things. Rigel, tell us what that would look like from your perspective. It's not necessarily just about turning the volume down, right?
Right. So you really have to gauge too loud by, again, who's asking or who's telling or who kind of what it is. But oftentimes it's not necessarily that the volume is so loud, it's that you've got a frequency that's a problem. So, and you guys coming into this, there's a spectrum of sound. It goes, from hertz to kilohertz all the way up to 20 K up, and then 20 below, and 20 hertz is low, 20 kilohertz is high. So that's kind of your spectrum of everything. And in each environment you're in, or your audio engineer is in, there's going to be a resonant frequency inside of that room, depending on the space, rectangle, square, oval, whatever it may be, dome. There's always something, there's a few different things that'll pop out. And so when someone comes to you and says it's too loud, oftentimes there's like a 1K that's popping out, or a 630, or 200 kilohertz, or whatever it might be for that particular room. And your audio engineer should be able to ferret that out, right? So they should equalize the system to where that's not going to be so harsh, because loud, in my opinion, means harsh. So you've got an older person, literally their ears are a lot bigger because your ears never stop growing. So their ears literally take in more sound than a younger person's do. And and if that frequency is too harsh or it's popping out, it's going to hurt their ear. And so you have to equalize the system to where it's very smooth and it's big sounding, but it's not harsh and it's not offensive. And that can be on the upper end, that can be on the lower end. If you got too much bass, like at Kingsland, we struggle with little 663 sometimes, and then 2K and 630 inside of our main room. And so when you're mixing vocals, you often go to those frequencies first and do a little dip. So that way when that vocal goes big, it carries, but it doesn't hurt. And it's, you're, as an engineer, you're also going for that goosebump moment when somebody goes big, and this carries, and it's so good, right? But it won't be like that if it's harsh. And so, there's an offensive frequency. So for me, loud there's an offensive frequency. So you have to make sure your system is balanced, and so that way that moment carries. Then again, you also have those one or two people in every church. Doesn't matter what it is, it's going to be too loud. So you do have to take those with a grain of salt and work with those people as well. So, and when somebody comes to the soundboard irate, which I've had happen, like yelling and screaming in the middle of a worship service, you just try to calm them down, and then you make some adjustments, and hopefully that makes them happy. And if you can't make them happy, send them to your operations pastor or somebody else and tell, hey, can we have this conversation later? We're kind of in the heat of the moment.
And really what can kind of put that all to rest is that you as a ministry, if it's in your student world or as you grow a little bit more into the adult world of your church, you just set a standard for what levels that you want to have each service at. So it could be a certain decibel. I say, okay, we're going to not get past this certain decibel and have a range that you go in. And you want to make sure that it's a safe range. And there's OSHA standards that you can look at and really find a range that is good, that serves the moment, serves your people, but also doesn't hurt them. And I think really it's more about these Ks. In fact, we have a little joke we say sometimes, like, hey, got a little too much 4K in that one right there. Can you adjust that? We kind of use that as kind of some pun that we have with each other. But it's really, I think, more about that. And so diving into that a little bit more and learning what all those mean, how you can adjust that. Because every room is different, like Rajul was saying, I think will really help you serve that room well. Rajul, if you were to boil it down to 3 things that a worship sound engineer would need to know, what would those 3 things be?
So the first thing is you always have to hit your cues. So in our environment, cues are critical, right? You turn the mic on or you turn the mic off. You can't mix a mic if it's not on. So cue is number 1, right? Pastor's mic, we always call it the money mic, because if you miss that cue, you don't get paid anymore. or you don't get to mix anymore. So make sure your mics are on in the critical moments, announcements, lead vocals, pastor coming up, those types of things. So and then number 2 is obviously your decibel level, your volume control, right? So like Josh alluded to earlier, like he said earlier, you want to make sure you're within ranges that you've talked about with your worship pastor and the congregation, and everybody's kind of landed on where that is. Like, we don't like to go above 97 here. And those are just big choir moments, and we don't want to carry at 97. We like to average probably 90 to 92, somewhere in that range, maybe 94. But you got to find the balance, right? Because if it's too soft, you lose the energy and the momentum in the room. But if it's too loud, people leave. So you kind of got to balance that. So that's number 2. You want to make sure you got a good, healthy level. And then number 3, you want to make sure your platform's happy, right? Because one of the main things as an engineer, if the band is not in sync, if they're not hearing each other well, if the platform's not happy, the click track's not working for some reason, or the bass player got unplugged, or whatever it may be, that's obviously going to affect your mix. And a band that's not in sync is you can't get a good mix. So you got to make sure your platform is happy. And those are kind of my top three.
The last thing I want to leave you with is this. You only rise to your level of preparation. So the more work you do in advance, communicating the details of what you want in a rehearsal and in the service with your audio engineer, the better all of those things are going to go. This is a relationship, and it's fluid, it's active, it's alive, and so it's important that you keep that momentum going, not just for 1 week, but for all the opportunities that you have to partner together with the audio engineer that you're working with. We're so glad that you could join us today. Thank you for being a part of this special time and training. I hope you were able to gain some things from us. And Rajal, hey, thanks for joining us, man.
Yeah, man. Pleasure to be here.
Awesome. We'll see you guys later.